Hey there, in this lecture we're going to talk about background images, something we haven't really jumped into yet. And it's a really commonly used style in CSS, and in designs you need to use background images for a lot of different things. For simply the background of your website, background images of certain elements, maybe the background image for a button or something like that. It's very common to use background images, and this lecture I'm going to show you all about how to do that. To speed things up a little bit, however, I've created a file already called background-images.html and also a CSS file called background-images.css, and those are available for download. They should already be in your CSS folder built in when you downloaded the entire course files at the beginning of the section. But if they're not there for some reason, you can download them in the this specific lecture in the extras section, or the resources section, somewhere on the right side if you're using Udemy, and they're also available as a download on Code College. Okay, so the HTML file looks like this, and it's going to have a bunch of HTML already built in, and that's basically because it looks like this. I'm using it as a kind of a documentation. I'm going to use this as an aid to teach you a little bit more about background images. So here we go, background images amigos. Let's talk about the properties. There are a few different background properties. The first one is background-image. This property is the location of the image itself. For example, if we're selecting an H1, we could say background-image, then the value would be URL, and then in a bracket or parentheses, and then in a string, which is two quotes, single quotes or double quotes, doesn't matter. And then we have the URL here. So this is the location of this pretend image. Or we can use a relative URL like this one right here. And we're familiar with relative and absolute URLs. This is an absolute URL. This is a relative URL. Background color. This allows us to add color to a background. An example in CSS would look like this. Background color, green. Background repeat. This is how the image will repeat within the element that is getting the background. The value can be any of the following. Background repeat. This repeats both on the X and Y axis, so up, down, and left and right, and will essentially tile the image across the entire background. Background repeat X. This repeats the background on the X axis, or also known as horizontally. Repeat Y. This is on the Y axis or vertically. And no repeat. This shows only the image once without repeating at all. Background position. This is the actual position of the background image within its container. The values can be as follows: top, right, bottom, left, and center. It can also be a percentage, length, or combination like so. In this example, we have 50 pixels and 20%. And there is a shorthand, a quick way around background images, and you don't necessarily have to type out all of the above code to set up your background images the way you want them. You could simply type background, and the shorthand can handle all of the values in one. So background, green, this is the color. Then we have the background URL, or a background image here. And then we have the position, top left, and then background repeat, no repeat. And down here, you'll see examples. This is where I have some built-in HTML, and we're actually going to create some backgrounds and background images. Jump into your HTML, and I'll just show you where that is. Down here, you could see a comment that says end documentation at line 98. And then we have just some examples. We're going to style these divs in our CSS that I provided, background-images.css. Scroll down past the layout section and you'll see your code here on line 45. Go ahead and remove that, and we're going to actually add our styles in there. So let's start off by selecting the background example class. That's a class that we're using on all the boxes, and we're going to give it a height of 300 pixels, a width of 300 pixels, and the border will be solid 1 pixel and black. Like so. And let's just make sure that's okay. It's working. But what we're going to actually do is change that to solid 1 pixel white, because this is a kind of dark background here, and we're just going to want to be able to see that if it ever conflicts. There we go. Perfect. Maybe even just to be safe, let's add 4 pixels in white. That will give us plenty of visual cue. Excellent. Let's move on to the first box, which is background -1. And also in the downloads, you should be able to download an images folder which has a bunch of images here that we'll be using throughout this section and upcoming. But it should already be in your folder if you downloaded it at the beginning of the section. But like I said, you could download that in the sidebar. Okay, here I'm just going to give you a little note about how this how the default CSS looks. So by default, background images repeat X and Y and are positioned top left. So basically, if you were just to say this, so background 1, we'll have background image, URL, and then we're selecting in the images folder the blue background.jpg. And I don't add any extra values here. This is by default going to be repeat X and Y. So it's going to tile and it will be positioned top left. So let's just see what that looks like. So there we go. The background image is repeated. Now you might wonder what the background image itself looks like. Let's just take a quick look here. So it is an 80 pixel by 80 pixel image, and it's just a blue texture. And you can see it fills the entire box because it's tiling. So it's repeating left and right, or it's repeating X and Y. And it's also starting from the top left corner of the container and then working its way all the way down here. So that is background 1. Let's do background -2. And then let's do just a simple background color, and let's do A3D. That'll give us a purple, and it just fills the entire container. Background 3, we have background image, URL. We're going to select that in the images folder, steak background.jpg, and we're going to background repeat it. No repeat. We want to default to nothing because standard, or by default, it will repeat X and Y, but we want it to have no repeat at all. Background position, center. We want to center it in the box. Center and center. We need to have the 2 values. And here we go. We have a centered steak background, and you can see it's not an image. I can't drag it. It's simply a CSS background. So it's not working like a standard image in HTML where I can actually pull the file around and save it on my computer. This is just part of the CSS. And then we're going to work with background 4. And this will be background URL. Whoops. Background URL. And we're actually going to do shorthand in this one. So we're going to say images and then the skull background. And right here after the URL, we're going to say bottom left. So it's going to start from the bottom left corner and then repeat only X on the X axis. And we're not going to add a color. If you did want to add a color, you just say something like this before the image, but we don't need a color. So let's just see. There we go, like so. Now let's say we did want a color, just to fill that out. Let's say white at the very beginning here. And there we go. So we have our background color and the background image, so you can have them both. Let's just do a different color. Let's do something like CCC. There we go. So you can see the background color and the background image repeating on the X axis. And so there you go. That is the background images in CSS and pretty much everything that you need to know. You can go through this lecture again. You can read the documentation, practice with different images. Go ahead and open up Photoshop and maybe save some images down, create some graphics, and just play around with it. I encourage you to just take a little bit of time now and just experiment with some HTML and CSS and try some background images. But don't worry if you don't, because we will be doing that in an upcoming lecture.